Hello, everyone. First and foremost, I want to say thank you for all the love on the first episode of the podcast. I always enjoyed talking with John Paul, and it was great to hear his insights into the future of our profession. In today's episode, I got to sit down with Dr. Mike Strub, a retired biometrician from Weyerhaeuser who has just been enjoying the biometrician stream, living on the beach and fitting growth and yield models. I had a lot of fun talking with Mike, and I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please help me welcome Dr. Mike Strub. Dr. Mike Strub to the second episode of my podcast. Really thankful to have you on. The first one was a lot of fun talking with John Paul, and now we get to hear the other side of the story. So welcome and thanks for being here.
Yeah, glad to be here, Mickey. I watched your first podcast and I really enjoyed it. I was impressed.
Yeah, it again was a lot of fun. It was good to hear what John Paul had to say. And well, let's just get right into you, though. You had some time as a professor in academia, but then immediately jumped into industry and spent the majority of your career at Weyerhaeuser. So I'm sure I'm going to ask the question that everybody would ask. Tell us all the secrets. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
No, I will tell you my secret, not all Weyerhaeuser secrets, because I'm still proprietarily bound.
Yeah, I know, man. I'm just making it.
My secret is to always have fun. No matter what you're doing, have fun. Don't work in a job where you're not having fun. You find something else to do.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, ever since I've met you, I think you were just right before retirement whenever I first met you, but you always looked like you were having fun. That's for sure.
Well, I retired in 2011, so
yeah,
I was probably long about that. It seems like you were at Stephen F. Austin with Dean.
With Dean Coble. So I started my master's with Dean in 2008, and it was, I think, 2009 whenever I went to my first Southern Mensurationist meeting, and that's when my introduction to the whole Southern Biometrics group. But then in 2010, I went to Virginia Tech, and I think it was that first year you came, and you and Chris had been working on some new side index equations or something, and you came to present that, and it really just blew my mind. So tell us, how did you get into forestry?
I guess it started out, I loved to swim. I loved outdoors. I was in the Boy Scouts, got to be an Eagle Scout, and then I spent 2 summers teaching camp at Camp Butler in Ohio. And I don't know, I just had a great time there. Just loved the outdoors. I always loved math. Forestry just seemed like the right thing. My only other pick was astronomy. I would have loved to have been an astrophysicist, but I couldn't have been up there with, Stephen Hawking's or any of those guys. I mean, they're so much smarter than me. But I ended up picking forest biometrics. And when I went to college, that's kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a forest biometrician.
And you're a native of Virginia?
No, I grew up in Ohio, Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio.
Oh, okay. So how did you choose Virginia Tech then for undergrad?
Well, my first 2 choices were Penn State and Michigan State, but I couldn't afford either of those. So Virginia Tech was kind of third on the list, and I'm really glad I went there, but it was cheap. That's why I went.
Fair enough. I think every grad student listening in right now would agree with that sentiment. Like, the cheaper the better, of course, but also you fortunately ended up in a good place. When you did your undergrad there, and then you went for your master's there in forest biometrics, who was your cohort? Who was your advisor, and who were you working with?
Well, let me tell you a little about my bachelor's first.
Oh, okay, sure.
Quite an interesting time too. It was Vietnam was going on, and I, was exempt as long as I was in college, and so I was also really interested in forestry and finding out if I really wanted to be a forester. So they had a co-op program there. I think they still do. It takes 5 years to get your degree instead of 4, but you go your freshman year, and then you kind of go Every other, these were um, quarters. We went every other quarter. I'd work, and then I'd go back to school. Then I'd work, and it was really a good choice, I thought. I ended up I started out with Department of Parks in Hampton, Virginia, and spent the summer there. I got to camp out all summer there too for free because I kept track of the other campers and collected the fees. That was a great summer. We mapped out all the trees where they were in public land in Hampton, Virginia. So I got to ride around in my father's Volkswagen Bug and made $2 an hour and got paid mileage. And I saved up enough money to pay for my next semester at Virginia Tech. So my dad had to pay my freshman year, and then I could earn enough to pay my way the rest of the way through there. So that was a lot of fun too.
Well, yeah, and these days I think paying your way through college is just more and more difficult. So
almost impossible now.
Some people are going to be really jealous to hear you say that.
I was lucky.
I think whenever I was in my master's, I made just enough to get by. It was not possible to.
Well, I mean, that's the way I was the whole time I was pretty much in college. It got better over time, but I ate a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and drank a bunch of Kool-Aid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it was in my junior year, and John Hosner, he was kind of one of my heroes. He was the department head there at the time,
Yeah.
and in fact, when I went to the first introductory course that John taught in forestry, he said, "Well, if you're becoming a forest biometrician, you can just name your price." And I was never able to name my price, but I thought it was good advice.
Yeah.
Anyways, John was always big on forest biometricians, and he really wanted some bad. But up to that point, they'd had one retiree from the Forest Service there, and he was kind of in tough shape. He ended up drinking himself to death. But he was able during my junior year to hire two of Jerry Clutter's new, just recent graduates. They were Al Sullivan and Harold Burkhardt. And so they came, and they were actually maybe 3 or 4 years older than me. I think Harold was less than 4, but they were kind of my age. And man, I had a forest biometrician to talk to, and it was so neat. It was wonderful when they came. And I took first time Harold caught forest biometrics. I took his course, and I was impressed. And I was co-oping with the Forest Service at that time, and I did a special study with Harold, and it was on aerial photographs. In fact, aerial photo volume tables. We went out and measured a bunch of tree crowns and diameters and developed some equations. So, you could look at the aerial photos and predict what the volume was of that particular stand. And I got an A in the course from Harold.
Nice.
And it was interesting because I guess it was 2018 when Ralph held the big meeting in honor of Harold.
Yeah.
It was joint UFRO, and you were there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I got to sit at the table with Harold during the banquet. And I asked him who his first student was. And he says, "Well, I consider you my first student."
Yeah.
He said, and the reason was because of that special study course. He really he claimed me as his first student just because I took that special study for him. So
yeah,
that was neat.
Yeah, I also did one too, but my special study didn't work out quite as well. I was using, I don't know, some volume equation or something, trying to come up with some new idea. And in the end, it was like, well, okay, we'll check that one off the list. It didn't work out.
Well, mine worked out really well because I took the same ideas and applied them to LIDAR when I was at Weyerhaeuser. So
yeah, awesome.
It bore fruit.
Yeah, and you've been basically working with LIDAR from the beginning. I remember some of your presentations from 15 years ago that you were there at the beginning. I know we're stepping forward a little bit, but since we're there, could you talk about how the changes that you've seen over the years in terms of LIDAR? And
yeah, I don't know if that big a change or not. I mean, I kind of got drug into LIDAR. There's a fellow at Weyerhaeuser there, Jeff Weldy. He just had a master's degree, but man, he was smart. He's retired now too, quite a bit younger than me. But LiDAR was the thing he was pushing. And so they said, well, yeah, can't you help us out? And I said, well, I did this with aerial photo volume tables and same old, same old. So I think things tend to repeat themselves too, Mickey. I mean,
Yeah.
but it was fun.
Yeah. Sure. I think we nowadays talk about some of this technology as if it's new, and I know we have new sensors, but I mean a lot of work has been going on for many years. I know we've made a lot of improvements. We're getting a lot better than we were, but it's really interesting to see how those changes have affected the way that we do forest sampling and how they're going to continue to change it. I know a lot of people are really interested in that.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of opportunity with the drones coming on now, and they're figuring out how to merge together, the LiDAR and the optical photos, and man, just so much data out there, and then they're getting remeasurements, and so not only can you guess what the trees look like, but you know how the ground grew as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to make advances as well.
Yeah, and I think the carbon markets have also, I think, push some of this technology. I think with the way that we need to have repeatability of measurements on, carbon plots, that LiDAR is going to be a big thing there so that we can actually able to, go back and look at the point clouds and see every little detail on the
Yeah,
carbon plot. So it'll be interesting to see that technology evolve, especially with the evolution of the carbon markets, I think.
yeah, it's interesting times, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah, exciting. Well, I didn't mean to jump too far ahead. You want to take us back to the bachelor days?
Oh, I'm ready to move on to graduate school, I
All
guess.
right, Michael. Finally, we get there.
Yeah, yeah.
So you had your special study with Harold, and then you got excited about forest biometrics. So you
Well,
decided,
I was going to be a forest biometrician from the start. I guess I
nice.
could talk bachelor a little more. I When I started out, I took all the statistics course required for a bachelor's degree and all the math courses, and so I actually thought about getting the second degree, a second bachelor's degree in statistics, but it would have taken me another year, and I would have had to take all the humanities courses, the artsy courses, and English and history and all that, and I was never any good at that. So I said, so what? Maybe I'll try and get a bachelor's degree in statistics. So
Yeah,
uh, that kind of, I was way ahead of the ball, really, compared to a lot of other forest biometricians, just because I started out as a in my bachelor's degree, just started out from the start, just wanting to be a forest biometrician. Which, I mean, if you can make up your mind ahead of time, it's a big jump on everybody else.
yeah, for sure. I remember being the only undergrad in forestry taking like geometry and trigonometry as my electives.
Yeah.
Everyone else was taking the fun classes, and they were like,
Oh
"What are you doing over there?" Mickey is like, "Well, I want to be a biometrician."
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you finished your bachelor's and master's at the same time?
No, it took me another year to get my master's.
Yeah.
Uh, but it took me 5 years, and luckily, if I had gotten a 4 year degree, I would have ended up in Vietnam.
Oh,
They called your numbers every year
yeah.
there, and I got a fairly low number that 5th year when I was a senior, just finishing up my degree. But the next year, since I got to lay over another year, I got a pretty high number. I think it was 182 or something like that, and they didn't call me. So,
Mm,
man, I lucked out.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyways, then I went on to get my master's degree, and that only took a year because I'd taken all the other courses, all the prerequisites, and all that good stuff. And I was also interested, like I said, in getting a master's degree in statistics. And so I took what they have with a written test, a really hard written test in statistics, and that uh, determines whether you can get a master's degree, a PhD. Are you qualified? And that pretty much shoes you in. I mean, it's an extremely difficult test. I've still got the questions, and I go back and look at them and wonder how in the world did I answer those questions?
Yeah.
It was fresh in my mind at that time. But anyways, I ended up passing the test at the PhD level, and so since I already had a master's in forest biometrics and a and a bachelor's degree in forest management, it made sense to get my PhD in statistics.
Yeah.
And
Because at that point, Virginia Tech didn't have a PhD program
oh yeah, they're very well known. It's an applied program essentially, but
for forestry, for forest biometrics.
well, Harold was kind of Harold and Al Sullivan were the start of the biometric department there. As soon as they were hired, and yeah, they had two biometricians there, and we had a biometrics department, and they started teaching graduate courses, and so things geared up in a hurry when they arrived.
Yeah. So you chose to do statistics instead of a PhD in forest biometrics.
Yeah, because I already had 2 degrees in forestry, and I was staying at the same college. I mean,
Yeah.
usually they encourage you to move
Yeah.
during your career,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I think these days it's definitely, if you get two from one, you should definitely go somewhere else for your third one.
yeah. So I went to statistics. It was still didn't have to move away from town or anything, so
Yeah.
that worked well.
Was Dr. Reynolds there whenever you took statistics when you were in this?
Marion Reynolds, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. In fact, he was on my committee. I
Yeah.
took a course from him. He did a good job teaching it.
Yeah, I took mathematical statistics from him. I imagine it was the same class that you took.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. No, he did not teach mathematical statistics. I'm thinking of Marion Reynolds. What's his name? Oh, heck. He was a character, one that taught theoretically. Whitfield Cobb was actually the one that was the hardest. That was undergraduate theoretical statistics. Man, he was tough. Oh, looks like Colonel Sanders. No, Marion Reynolds was teaching operations research when I was there. That's what I that was kind of his specialty. But it could be by that time he was teaching the theory course. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, the course might not have been called mathematical statistics, but it definitely was. I can tell you that. And I saw that exam too, and it was the same type of exam when I was there that you pass at the master's level or the PhD level. So you're competing with all the same people who already have master's degrees in statistics.
And mathematics and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, a lot of smart people. That's still a very good statistics program.
Surprised the heck out of me when I passed it.
Yeah.
Well, the only questions I missed were on the applied side because I'd never taken the applied statistics courses because the graduate level applied statistics courses. I don't know if I ever took many of them, but one of the conditions for getting the PhD was I had to take some applied statistics courses at the graduate level, so I did that. And actually, as an undergraduate, I taught the introductory statistics course. I was an instructor. No, that was when I was in graduate school. I ended up teaching the introductory level course as an instructor. So I got a little more pay for that than just a teaching assistantship.
Yeah. Well, good. And then after you finished your PhD, you went on to teach at Penn State, where you originally wanted to go, right?
Yeah. No, I loved Nittany Valley. Oh, man, it was great up there. Got to meet Joe Paterno. Oh, it was something else those years.
Yeah.
And really enjoyed them.
And you spent a lot of your time as an adjunct since then. So I have to ask, what was the move from academia into industry?
Well, I was teaching a whole lot of courses, and I was also finishing up my dissertation at the same time those 2 years.
Yeah.
In fact, then I went to work from Weyerhaeuser. I went to stop by VPI and picked up my diploma. My mom and dad wanted to see me graduate, so I dressed up and graduated and got my diploma on the way to work at Weyerhaeuser. So it was kind of whirlwind time. But I started out teaching kind of for the average student, and then over time that just got so frustrating. I started teaching for the best students, and so I remember I was kind of a hard ass at times, but I had fun doing it. And I've had a lot of students come back and really thank me for kind of challenging. In fact, there was a geneticist at Weyerhaeuser there in Hot Springs where I was. And he said he remembered taking my course and he remembered one of the questions on the exam was there is no answer. I mean, and he got it right. He answered, there is no answer to this. And he was correct. He was always impressed. But I was kind of getting tough on the students there at the end. And I was teaching a course in management, the senior level course in management. Brian uh, Brian Turner had gone on sabbatical. He was the other biometrician there, and so I was teaching his courses. Plus, I was team teaching. But in the forest management course, I was teaching them linear programming, and it was kind of tough for a senior in because it had matrices and all that good stuff in it, and they had to use the computer, and I was a little hard on them, and they got saying to me, they said, "Well, how do you know this is important? How come we have to learn this?" They said, you've never been out really working for industry or anybody. You've never done this yourself." And I got thinking about it, but yeah, they're right. Maybe I should go to work for industry. So uh, uh, during that last semester there, I came up with an idea to try and take some graduate students on a road trip. And I had a good friend, graduate students, and we visited all over the place. And one of the places we visited was Hot Springs, and Bob Bailey was in charge of research at that point in time. And he offered me a job. And I said, well, that might not be a bad thing to do. These students are probably right. I'll just go work for Weyerhaeuser for a couple of years and get industry experience, and then I can go back to academia. So that was my plan when I left.
Yeah. I had a similar plan, and then I got into my position here at Larson and McGowan, and I'm having so much fun.
Yeah, I know what you
don't
mean.
want to go back. It's just,
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are made for academia, and they have a lot of fun. My wife is one of them. She's a professor of chemistry, but I am having so much fun right now in consulting that I don't think I want to go back. It's just facing the real world problems and getting to solve them. And, it's every day is a new thing. It's just so different. The lifestyle is just so different. And I think that's what I was made for. So I feel you there.
Yeah, I mean, you get to see something done with your work.
Yeah.
When you see a company, I mean, one of my first big projects at Weyerhaeuser, I worked with the economists out there in Federal Way, Washington, and we came up with a change in the management plan that was resulted in, $150, $200 an acre savings across, I don't know, we had about 8 million acres in the South. So you multiply that out, and I saved the company enough money on that one project to pay for all of research the whole time I was there. So, it makes you feel good.
Nice. Yeah, it's pretty awesome whenever you can basically fund yourself through savings.
Yeah. So then there were some people at one point in time tried to get me laid off, and then the economists out there stepped in and said, "No, we'll pay a salary." No problem. So it was great.
Yeah. And so you spent your entire career in Hot Springs.
Yeah, I did. Yep. Yeah. Well, I would go to the West Coast a couple times, probably 3 or 4 times, and stayed out there for like maybe 3 months at a time, rented an apartment when we were working on the Douglas fir model, and when we were trying to come up with optimal management regimes. And, we had big projects, and I had to spend some time on the West Coast, but my home was Hot Springs the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. And what did you think about that? I mean, coming from kind of the Northeast down to Hot Springs, I mean, I'm from Texas, so for me, it's home, but it's got to be a lot of difference compared to where, especially coming out of Blacksburg in those days. It must have been a lot different going to Hot Springs.
I loved it. I don't know. It's a retirement community. They got a horse track there. They got 3 big lakes there. I ended up living on the lake, and oh man, it was great. I really enjoyed it. It's up in the mountains, but they're the shortest mountains, the Ouachitas, in the United States. But it was still fun. I liked it. I liked it a lot.
Yeah. But as soon as you could, you moved to the beach.
That was because I ended up with my second and fourth wife. Yeah. What can I say?
Yeah.
My heart moved me here.
Nice. Well, we definitely are thankful that we had you around in the Southeast. I mean, you've definitely pioneered a lot of things that we're still using today. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is you and Chris worked on those site index equations, those GATA equations and self-referencing equations. And one of the things I think about site index is we really drill in on precision, precision, precision. But the underlying data that we're using to estimate site index is sometimes like, I don't even know where that comes from. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm curious if if you've thought about this, if you pondered on this a bit, and if you have any comment on it.
Oh yeah, I can talk for hours. I guess the best, we're just talking data. Some of the data that I got to use was really good. And it's, feld tree data. And when I first went to work at Weyerhaeuser, they would use, Bob Bailey, I think, kind of came up with it. And a lot of people worked with it, which they would cut the bolts into like 5-foot sections and count the rings and then kind of interpolate in between where the the height was at different ages. And we improved on that. We got us a log splitter, and you could split the bolts right down the middle, and then you can read from the rings exactly how tall the tree was. So we had some pretty good data to work with at Weyerhaeuser. I'd still recommend that way if you're going to do felled tree data. Man, you can nail it right on the head, and that's some of the best data in the world to work with. But the problem is that you got to have a mature tree to do it, and with new practices coming on, genetics changing constantly, you really don't have that opportunity, and so you are kind of, like you say, stuck with the data just from field measurements. And of course, height's one of the hardest things to measure from the ground, but it's the easiest thing to measure with LiDAR. So I think that LiDAR is really going to improve the data quality if we can figure out a way how to build those data sets off of the LiDAR data. I think that'll give us a lot better shot at height growth than trying to do the measurements from the ground. And then there's the possibility of using drones to measure just individual tree heights as you go through a plot, which to me is kind of an exciting idea. I think you can really nail it on the head there. Then, so like you say, I think things are evolving, and man, next generation biometrician, you guys got it made with all the exciting things coming out.
Yeah, I guess my question, stem analysis data is great, perfect for developing height age equations. But my question was more along the lines of, we're using those equations to estimate site index from inventory data. And it's the inventory data that I think is sometimes questionable. How are we measuring our site trees? Where is our average DOM codom height coming from? And that's what's sometimes questionable. And site index is, of course, the most important component to most of them. I mean, it's in most of the models, right? And so it's the driver behind productivity. And we still haven't found a really good way to get around it, at least to my knowledge. And so that was really my question, is that, we can try to continue to come up with the best site index equations and increase precision by 1-2%. But at the same time, are we increasing the precision of the estimates in our inventory?
Well, I mean, there's LiDAR, which is going to help out there for your inventory.
Yeah. But there are so many ways to estimate the average height of a stand. So are we just going to use the top 90% of all returns on the LiDAR, or what are we going to do?
Yeah, I mean, there's other ways of getting around it other than average, or average height of the DOMs and codoms, or the biggest trees. One way I've done it in the past is to come up with use each tree individually, essentially. Fit each tree instead of fitting the average. The way we do it now, you get the average of the DOMs and codoms, or the tallest 80 trees per acre or whatever, and then you just have one growth series, which is the average over time. One alternate way of fitting the curves is to, instead of fitting through that way, just fit the individual trees. I've done that before, and it actually comes out a little better than trying to use the average. At least that's been my experience.
Okay.
And so now I got an even newer idea. It's called microsite index. And there, we're talking about the microsite of a tree. So instead of having a common X or a common site index for the entire plot, each tree gets to have its different X.
Mm.
And it turns out to be a huge computational problem. And I
Mm.
just fed up some curves working with Corey on the NIMP data,
Mm.
and it
Let's explain to our listeners that not everybody may be familiar with that. Dr. Corey Green is a forest biometrician at Virginia Tech now, and he is leading the Forest Modeling Research Cooperative. And the NIMP data you're talking about was established permanent plots initiated by Harold Burkhardt. What in the 80s, I think.
Yeah, I think it was 82, I want to say.
Yeah. And so NIMP stands for non-intensively managed plantations.
That's right.
Yeah. So you're working with these data, fitting some individual tree, height age models.
That's right. And when you fit up site index or microsite index, the new term, what you have to do is you have to have a different site for every different plot when you're just doing regular site index.
Mm-hmm.
And so nested in the optimization process, you have to minimize the error sums of squares to come up with the particular site index for that plot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you do it on a tree level, you got to have a different site index or a different microsite index for every single tree. Yeah. So instead of every iteration finding the global parameters, you had maybe a couple thousand plots. Well, we didn't even have that many plots, but I don't know, maybe a couple hundred plots.
Yeah.
So you got a couple hundred X's. Well, we had like 60,000 trees. So every iteration when finding the global parameters, you had to fit up site index estimates 60,000 times. So it took me like 3 or 4 days to come up with a set of parameter estimates, but it worked.
Imagine.
If you're
I don't want to get too far in the weeds. I know some people's eyes are just glassing over at the moment, but I think one of the things you bring up, though, is the issue of big data and computational power, because we're still, at least in many cases, people are still growing stands. We now have the capability of growing trees, but it might be just growing a stand table or a tree list. But eventually we're going to get to the point to where we can grow individual trees on individual plots. But this is like huge data, right? I mean, if you're having to come up with a site index estimate for every tree on a plot in a stand, and you've got, 2,000 stands over 100,000 acres, this gets to be very big data. So I'm sure for you, this is, for the past 40 years, this is a much bigger data set than you had back then, and computational power has just exploded exponentially. Can you comment or talk about that, at least what you've seen in terms of computing power and maybe some of the major stages that you've seen in things that we've been able to do as biometricians and mensurationists?
Yeah, I tried. I've been doing the individual tree thing for a while since I started in with the organon thing, and so when I first started on organon, this would have been back in the early 2000s. I want to say 2008. Greg Johnson came on board through an acquisition, and he was a big organon buff. And at that particular point in time, pruning still is a big deal for Weyerhaeuser. But if you want to estimate what the product mix is coming out of the trees that you prune and justify the value of the pruning economically, then you have to be able to follow a individual tree through time. And then we were using diameter distribution models at that particular point in time. It wasn't viable, actually. That's kind of why it happened with Bob and why I left Weyerhaeuser. Was there were some big internal arguments over what to use, and Dave Depta, one of the economists out there, had come up with what he called the Mutter function, which is just a discrete. You just take the gamma distribution and turn it into a discrete distribution, and that was what was built into the inventory. And Weyerhaeuser spent millions of dollars on the inventory, so we weren't going to change that. So Dave King came on board, and we figured out how to adapt the Mutter function instead of the Weibull to all the models, and we fish in with Dave, and we just worked so close together after that. It was great.
Yeah.
But anyways, where am I going, Vicky?
Yeah, so we were talking about, computational power and the
Yeah.
changes that you've seen.
Yeah. So that was how I got into anyways, pruning forced us into the individual tree model, or the tree list model is essentially what we call it, the Weyerhaeuser tree list model, or WTLM. And I got to be in charge of that effort, and we had a bunch of people on board, and it was a lot of fun. But when I was trying to fit it, you have to ensure path invariance. You have to kind of ka-chunk year by year through the growth over a growth period, 3, 5 years, whatever. And that's kind of computationally intense. And then we were fitting mortality, diameter growth, and height growth all at the same time. So you had all those parameters. I've just redone it recently for Organon South with the VPI data, and it is pretty slow, but it's a lot faster than it used to be. In 2008, what I did was I would optimize for diameter growth and get new parameter estimates, optimize for height growth and then get new parameter estimates, optimize for mortality, get new parameter estimates, and then start all over again, cycle through the three again, over and over and over again until the parameter estimates don't change anymore. And that's what I assumed was the optimum. Mm-hmm. And that was best I could do in 2008. And it took me about 3 months. Pretty fast computer at that time to get the parameter estimates.
Yeah.
So then I've done it more recently. And with the new computers, you can do it in, now this has been a couple years ago, but fairly new computers. And they haven't really changed terribly, a whole lot in the last few years anyways. But it would take me about 40, 50 minutes to do the same thing. So it was immensely faster. But now the latest thing I reported on in Portland was, instead of jumping through, going through diameter, height, mortality, diameter, height, mortality, what you can do is take the three likelihood functions for diameter, for height, and mortality, multiply them together and maximize the product of those three, and that essentially gives you the maximum likelihood estimates in one fatal swoop. But it takes a lot longer. But I can do that with today's computers in 3 or 4 days, about the same as microsite index.
Yeah, I think the important thing here is that the computer computational speeds are just getting much faster. We're able to work with these, and it's the right time because now we're really dealing with large data sets. I mean, we're talking with, putting LiDAR even on a plot, we're talking about a couple gigabytes of data for a plot. If you multiply that by a couple thousand plots, well, then the data gets pretty big pretty fast.
And then when you look at LiDAR and how much data you got there, oh man, it's something else. I can remember with Weyerhaeuser way back when, they would not store the inventory data. They would just use the inventory data to come up with the parameters in this mother function they had, the gamma function, discrete version of the gamma, and that's all they had room to store, was just those for all the stands in Weyerhaeuser. And then it was a huge deal. I remember when it happened, when they're going to save the inventory. I want to have it over time. Oh man, it was wonderful.
Yeah, I imagined. And I'm complaining because we still roll data up into stand tables, and
that's a big mistake.
Imagine not having inventory data at all.
No, there's no need to do that anymore.
Yeah, that's what I think as we move along, our data storage capabilities are getting better, and we're constantly improving those processes. It's still interesting to see, kind of the stand one-liners that just have volume rolled up by product. And I'm going like, all right, guys, like, we're not dealing with floppy disk anymore. We have clouds. We can store the data.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, just what I can buy, for a couple $100, I can get like 8 terabytes of data drive. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember when the flash memory came out and it was like, I don't know, like 512 megabytes was like
Yeah,
$600, you know, and
yeah,
it's unheard of. Now we give away like 10 gigabyte flash drives for free at conferences, you know.
yeah.
Well, it's very exciting, at least as you know, kind of a mid-career biometrician. It's very excited to see these changes coming. There's just like so many like new opportunities that increase computational power and data storage brings, and it's like a really exciting time to be, you know, in this industry.
Certainly is. Just keeps getting better.
Yeah, and we keep having fun.
Oh yeah, that's the most important part. If you're not having fun, forget it.
Um, I, one question. So I talked to our friend Nate Osborne yesterday, and he was, you know, telling how he liked the podcast, but he's like, you need to ask what they've seen, you know, that has been surprising. So this question's coming from Nate Osborne. What have you seen over your years that really just surprised you?
Jumped up and surprised me. I don't know. I remember I was a little surprised one time at a RMA conference. I don't know. You know what the RMA Resource Modeling Association?
No.
Anyways, in fact, there's a guy you need to interview. He'd be really great. Bill Smith. He's he did the design of the current FIA plots, you know, with the hexagons and all that.
Yeah.
He's the one that came up with that, and he's not really a mainstream biometrician. He's kind of the silviculture bent, but he's a really sharp guy. But anyways, he was hosting this resource modeling association. Is in Beaufort, North Carolina, at the fisheries facility there. They're doing fisheries research there, and he invited me to come and give a speech. In fact, I think I talked about that the process I was just talking about with the organon and how to fit the diameters and heights and survival. That's what topic my topic was. The Research Modeling Association talk, and it went over real well. And I was really impressed with the group there at that time. And I really enjoyed listening to the fisheries because they had all kinds of new ideas, and they were really advanced in terms of biometrics. Fisheries bio was in fact Snooty. Oh man, I don't know if you read his paper, but he's a member of that group, and I got to at a later meeting I got to walk on a hike with him up to a glacier and back, 10 miles up and back. He was like in his late 70s at the time. Man, he just hopped right along, and oh, he's something else. Anyways, I digress. Uh, I went to that meeting, and right after the meeting, they were having an election, and they wanted me to vote on, you know, who would be the next president. And I did a write-in vote for Bill Smith, and so they added him on the ballot, and lo and behold, he got to be president of RMA. And so when Bill was president, he said, well, you know, I think we ought to get Strub to be on the board of directors.
Yeah.
And I said, so they asked me, would I serve on the board of directors? And I said, well, I have to get permission from Weyerhaeuser because RMA, their old style was to every other year they would have the conference outside of North America. Mm-hmm. And so Bill hosted it one year when it was in North America, and I could go easily. But, you know, the next year, it's been all kinds of places. Chris and I hosted it in Warsaw, Poland one time, and you go all around the world. So I had to get buy-off from Weyerhaeuser to be able to serve on that and be able to do the travel, and they'd pay for it. And lo and behold, they said okay. And so, yeah. Man, I got to travel all over the world with on their ticket to do that. So that was wonderful. But my point that I was getting to is I was at a conference. I think that might have been in Bergen, Norway. But anyways, these people were talking about their models, and of course they're modeling all of natural resources, you know, the whole smear, and they have a name for what we do, and they call it toy modeling. Because all we're doing, you know, it's just forest stands. That's just a toy compared to what they're trying to model. So I don't know. Maybe we've got it easy. But
Yeah, so technical difficulties. We were just talking about computational power and all of that, and then the Wi-Fi dropped here in my office. I don't remember where we were, but I think we have covered a lot of things. And is there anything else that you had that you wanted to talk about today?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I'd just like to encourage all young biometricians, and in fact, I might even have an ad or two here to end up with. Don't forget the Knoxville meeting. I'm hoping you're going to be there, Mickey.
Yeah, I am going to be there. The Southern Mensurationist meeting is going to be in Knoxville, Tennessee this year.
Oh, better than that, it's the joint.
Oh, it's the joint with the North.
Nemo.
Yeah,
Yeah,
with
Lord
Emo.
Hayes.
Oh,
And
right.
also FIA is hosting it.
Oh, okay.
They did this one other time in Knoxville with the three of them getting together. Oh, it was a great meeting. Big meeting, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely excited about it. It's going to be a good meeting. I think Sheng Yi is going to be a wonderful
Oh
host.
yeah,
Uh,
he's great.
yeah, he's wonderful, and we'll have to get him on the podcast at some point to advertise a little bit. But yeah, I do hope that all of the grad students make it up to the meeting this year. I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah. Oh, and I guess I should mention Harold Burkhart. I noticed you have the podcast in memory of Harold,
Mm.
and I did make his funeral. I'm sorry you couldn't make it, Mickey, but it was really a great experience, and I enjoyed it immensely. And there's a lot of old students there. Uh, Dick Daniels, I talked with him for quite a while. Tom Fox wasn't a graduate student. He taught there. He was there. It's good talking to Tom. And uh, Ed Green was down. Oh man, it was just like old times. A lot of Harold students were there as well. So
Yeah, we wanted to be there. We had something else come up that weekend that got us out of town, and we were not unable to go.
yeah,
And it was so unfortunate because I was the one the whole time saying, "Hey, let us know what's going on. We want
yeah,
to be there."
yeah,
Because Harold was just such a special person. He really was a wonderful mentor. Even after I finished my PhD, we would talk a lot, and he always made time for me.
yeah,
And I mentioned that at that meeting in 2018, how special that was of Harold, because not all major professors have the same mindset that Harold did, that it was about the students, it wasn't about him.
yeah.
And anytime I saw Harold get an award, what did he say immediately? This is because of the students. This is for the students. And he always was that selfless. Um, just a beautiful person. I'm so thankful that I got to study with him and that I got to know him.
Yeah, Ralph Amadeus actually gave a part of the funeral service. He gave a really nice talk, and he mentioned a lot of those same things about Harold during the funeral as well. So yeah, it was good.
Yeah. And well, but I know we're trying to wrap up here, but you worked with Harold since you were an undergrad student. So, you said he was just a few years older than you, but you guys had a wonderful relationship over
Oh,
your
brings back so many wonderful and in some ways sad memories. I remember we talked about when they put in the NIMP and when they had the first meeting for the Virginia Tech cooperative. I was there, and before I retired, Harold said that you're the only one left that was at the original meeting. I mean, Ralph Amadeus wasn't even there because he wasn't hired at that point in time.
Yeah.
And so now I am the only one left. Now, Harold, we were the only two, and now I am the only one left at that first meeting. So, that's sad, but happy to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm definitely thankful for you to come on the podcast today. I'm you and I have gotten to talk quite a bit over the past few years that I've been, back in the U.S. But I think being able to share your journey in forestry with others, I think, is going to be uh, really a blessing for many of us who haven't gotten to know you as well as I have. And so I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on, and look forward to seeing you in Knoxville.
Enjoyed it. See you in Knoxville, Mickey.
That was a lot of fun. I always enjoy talking to Mike, and I really appreciate both him and John Paul for being the first guests on my podcast. Every time I see them, I learn something new. For those that don't know them personally, make sure to say hi to them at the upcoming joint Southern Mensurationists, Northern Mensurationists, and FIA meeting in Knoxville, Tennessee this coming October. So, till next time, bye everybody.